There's actually a good chance that the Las Vegas Raiders could land Ben Johnson, who's considered one of the top play callers in the NFL, and according to Vincent Bonsignore, the momentum for this move is growing. He even tweeted about how things are building up for Ben Johnson and the Raiders. At first, I didn't really think it was realistic. When I looked at other teams and the quarterbacks they had, I figured Ben Johnson would prefer a better situation. Teams like the Bears with Caleb Williams or the Jaguars with Trevor Lawrence seemed like obvious choices for him. Even before Mike Vrabel took the job with the Patriots, I thought New England with Drake May would be a better fit for Ben Johnson. The Raiders, on the other hand, didn't have a proven franchise quarterback and weren't in a position to draft one either. I didn't think the Raiders had much of a chance. But recently, I've started to reconsider. There's been a lot of talk about the influence Tom Brady has had on the Raiders, and that's definitely a factor. Also, I heard Ben Johnson's press conference today, and one of his answers really made me think. It almost seems like he might actually prefer the Raiders after all. There's a real possibility that Ben Johnson could end up coaching the Raiders. Ben Johnson is definitely giving a lot of thought to his next move. During an interview, he was asked how this year's interview process compares to last year's. He explained that this time, he's much more focused on what he's looking for as a coach. When he becomes a head coach, he needs to make sure certain things are in place, not just on the offensive side, but on defense too. That really made me stop and think. Maybe Ben Johnson actually prefers the Raiders because of their defense. Now, Patrick Graham has done a great job with the Raiders' defense. Even though he's likely not coming back, he's played a big role in bringing in talent that could help the team succeed. Take Nate Hobbs, for example. He was drafted by the Raiders, and Trayvon Mullen has thrived under Graham's coaching. I'd even argue that the Raiders had a top 5 secondary this season, and that doesn't even include players like Joran Bennett and Jack Jones, or younger guys like Isaiah Palau. And of course, the defense has standouts like Max Crosby and Christian Wilkins, two of the best players in the league at their positions. When Ben Johnson is looking at the teams available, he's likely noticing the strong pieces the Raiders have on defense, which could be a major factor in his decision. When Ben Johnson looks at the rosters of teams like the Patriots or the Chicago Bears, he sees a solid offense, but the defense tells a very different story. As a play caller, he can control what happens with the offense. He can take any group and turn it into a top 5 or top 10 unit. But there's something he can't control: the defense. He can't just add a Max Crosby or a Christian Wilkins to a team like the Bears or Patriots. The Raiders, on the other hand, already have some standout defensive players. I know not everyone agrees, but from a talent perspective, the Raiders have one of the best defenses in the league. Ben Johnson likely sees this, and maybe even Tom Brady has pointed it out to him. The Raiders' defense has playmakers like Max Crosby, Christian Wilkins, and others who could make a huge difference. This could be a major selling point for Ben Johnson, because while he can work wonders on offense, he knows it's hard to fix a defense in one draft or one free agency period. It takes time, and that's something that teams like the Raiders already have in place. Another piece of news that got me thinking was a report from Adam Schefter. He mentioned that the Raiders did not try to trade up for Jayden Daniels, despite rumors that they were heavily pursuing him. Some reports suggested the Raiders made multiple offers, but Schefter said that wasn't the case. There's also been a separate report about the Washington Commanders. Apparently, when Ben Johnson interviewed with them last year, he made it clear that he wanted Sam Howell as the team's quarterback. He told them that if he became the head coach, Sam Howell had to be the guy under center. But things didn't go as he hoped. Adam Peters, who had already been hired as the general manager at that point, told Ben Johnson that the Commanders were set on drafting Jayden Daniels and wouldn't be following his preference for Howell. Lake Lewis Jr., a well-known insider for the Washington Commanders, shared this story. He explained that during their trip to Detroit for the interview, Ben Johnson stuck to his guns about wanting Sam Howell as his quarterback. However, Adam Peters stood firm and said, "No, we know who we're drafting, and that's the quarterback we're going with." Peters wasn't about to change his mind, and as Lewis pointed out, if anyone should be upset, it should be Jayden Daniels, since he wasn't the guy Ben Johnson wanted. Some people might think it's crazy that Ben Johnson would prefer Sam Howell over Jayden Daniels, but this story definitely sheds light on his thinking at the time. The thing is, we also have to consider that Ben Johnson might feel he needs a certain type of quarterback for his offense. As a coach, he likely wants a player who can throw the ball well and stay within the structure of his system. Take Caleb Williams, for example. His greatest strength is the magic he creates outside of the playbook. He excels at improvising and making off-script plays, but that might not be what Ben Johnson wants in a quarterback. Caleb Williams has struggled to stay within a structured offense, and maybe that's something Ben Johnson isn't looking for. Jayden Daniels is similar in that regard. He's better than Williams at playing within structure, but he still relies a lot on making plays outside of it. So perhaps Ben Johnson prefers quarterbacks like Jared Goff or Sam Howell, guys who can execute a play as designed, where the ball needs to go from one point to another. They don't need to make magic happen. They just need to get the job done. In fact, Ben Johnson might even prefer someone like Aiden O'Connell, who's not known for making plays outside the structure, but he can run a clean, efficient offense. I'm not saying he definitely prefers Aiden O'Connell over Caleb Williams, but it wouldn't surprise me if he does. It seems like Ben Johnson values a quarterback who can follow the plan and deliver the ball where it needs to go. So, when you look at his preference for Sam Howell over Jayden Daniels, it makes sense. It could explain why he didn't take the Washington Commanders job. If they weren't willing to work with him on the quarterback situation, that might have been a deal breaker. Ben Johnson was actually offered the Washington Commanders head coach job, but he turned it down. Instead, he went back to the Detroit Lions, where they gave him a raise. When you think about it, that's an interesting twist. It's also interesting that the Raiders didn't try trading up with the Commanders to grab Jayden Daniels, especially since the Commanders were clearly set on him, which makes sense for them. However, we still don't know if Jayden Daniels will become a top 5 quarterback in the NFL. While he's had a strong start, success in the first year is different from the second, third, and fourth years. NFL teams adjust, they find your weaknesses, and they attack them. But regardless of all that, the idea of Ben Johnson possibly becoming the Raiders' head coach is exciting. If he does, I wouldn't be surprised if the Raiders' defensive talent plays a big part in his decision. Maybe Ben Johnson looks at players like Max Crosby and Christian Wilkins and thinks, "This is the team I want to work with." It's also possible that Ben Johnson has other plans in mind. Maybe he feels like he can bring in someone like Hendon Hooker with him. Maybe the Lions have already agreed to that. But then again, maybe Hendon Hooker isn't someone Ben Johnson is even interested in. We don't know for sure. What we do know is that if the Raiders do land Ben Johnson, it seems like a good fit, and I'm confident they'll find success with him. Before I wrap up, there are 2 more reports I want to quickly mention. Jeremy Fowler shared that Pete Carroll spent most of Monday afternoon. Pete Carroll has been at the Raiders headquarters recently, interviewing for their head coach position, according to sources. The Super Bowl winning coach has also spoken to the Bears and could even be on the Cowboys' radar. This is interesting because Pete Carroll is widely regarded as an excellent head coach. He's a defensive-minded guy and has called plays on that side of the ball in the past. What stands out, though, is that Pete Carroll has already had an in-person interview with the Raiders, while Ben Johnson's interview was only via Zoom. That's a key difference. If the Lions make it to the next round of the playoffs, the Raiders might not be able to meet with Ben Johnson face-to-face for a couple of weeks, depending on how long Detroit's season goes. This could create a bit of a delay in the process. As for Pete Carroll, his interview with the Raiders happened in person, and I'd argue that outside of Ben Johnson, he's probably the Raiders' second-choice candidate. After Ben Johnson, Pete Carroll seems like the most likely pick, and I wouldn't be upset with that choice. He's a seasoned coach with a lot to offer. Personally, I tend to prefer coaches who are play callers, especially on the offensive side. I like the idea of letting a coach take charge of the offense and make it run smoothly. However, there are also defensive-minded coaches who have proven they can be successful. Some coaches, no matter their background, are just good at what they do, and Pete Carroll is definitely one of those guys. So I wouldn't be upset at all if the Raiders decided to bring him in. On another note, the Raiders have requested to speak with Sheldon White, the Steelers' director of pro personnel, about their general manager position. White has a lot of experience in the league. A couple of years ago, he worked as a scout for the Washington Commanders and has also been involved with other teams like Michigan State. He's definitely a name to watch, and I've read a lot about his strong reputation in the industry. To wrap things up, Ben Johnson still seems like the top candidate for the Raiders head coach position, but we'll see how things unfold. It's likely that the Raiders will hire a general manager first and then bring in a head coach. It'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. Let me know what you think. Thumbs up, subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next video.